What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Monkey Finance Show podcast. And in today's episode number 42, I'm going to be talking about bonds. I'm going to help answer a viewer's question. Shanice posted a comment on my YouTube channel on one of my bond videos. So I'm going to read the comment, and then I'm going to spend 15-20 minutes talking about my thoughts about bonds. So thank you guys so much for listening. If you're here from the YouTube channel, I appreciate the support. I'm trying to grow this podcast to at least be as big as the YouTube channel, if not bigger, because I really do enjoy filming these podcasts. One, they're much quicker because there's no video editing, and I don't have to get the camera out and transfer all the files, which makes YouTube really not fun. And two, I get to speak my mind when I record these podcast episodes. There's no pieces of paper or index cards in front of me. I just kind of go off the top of the head, which I really enjoy doing. And I think you get better information from me that way. Less researched, more from my personal experiences, which I guess could be a good or bad thing. Anyways, all right, so Shanice, your comment that you left, you said, what do you think about FUAMX at this time? I have it in my rollover IRA, and it seems to be doing well, but is it necessary for me to have it at age 29? So thanks again for the comment. Now, if you guys are not familiar, FUMAX is the Fidelity Intermediate Treasury Bond Index Fund. So this is one of the funds that I listed in my top 5 Fidelity Bond Fund videos. It's probably one of the safer bonds. I guess if you went short-term Treasury in bond index funds, that would be even safer. But this is more of a intermediate, so it's 10-year on average maturity date. And it's not going to drop as much as the long term. It's not as well diversified as FXNAX, which is the Fidelity Total Bond Market Index Fund, because that one has short, intermediate, and long-term treasuries. It's got corporate bonds. It's got mortgage-backed securities. It's got a lot more packed into it, and that's the one I usually recommend, FXNAX. But this one's fine too. If you wanted to pair like an intermediate treasury bond with a short-term treasury bond, that would be that would work just as well. So Shanice says that she has it in her rollover IRA. So I'm assuming it's a traditional IRA, and it's doing well. And she's 29. So let's take a look at the performance of this fund, because this year no bond fund has done well. As we've seen, kind of the market, the equities market really fly high this year. I think it's up almost 30%. Bonds have come back down since their all-time highs in March of 2020. So this year, this fund has done negative 4.6% for the year. Compare that to the S&P 500, which I'm just going to pull up FXAIX. I know that's not the S&P 500, but it's just the Fidelity version. That one has done year-to-date 27.31. So a huge difference, right? And Shanice, because you're 29, I'm assuming you're going to have a time horizon probably somewhere along the lines of another 30 years. At 30 years, that puts you at 59. And then, again, I don't know if you plan on retiring at 59. At 59 and a half, you can draw from this rollover IRA. So I'm just going to take you out and to the earliest that you can draw from it. So you have 30 years out. And in year one, which is this year, you've kind of disadvantaged yourself being in the bond fund, because if those same assets that you have in this FUAMX, the Intermediate Treasury Bond Fund, if you had that in FXAIX, which is the S&P 500, you would have been up over 27% instead of down negative 4 or 4.5, whatever that number was, negative 4.6, right? So that's year one, kind of how you set yourself up. Now, it doesn't mean that next year that the S&P next year could be down 20% and this bond fund could be up 10%, right? It's completely possible, within the realm of possibility. So looking at a year to year is kind of silly, but because you have a 30-year time horizon, We know that this fund over, let's say, a time frame of give or take 20 to 30 years is going to do somewhere around 3.5 to 5% compounded annually. And we also know that the S&P 500 within that same time frame is going to do something around 7.5 to 10% compounded annually, right? So we know over that 30-year stretch that the S&P 500 is going to beat this fund. Now, is it going to beat it on a year-to-year basis? It's anybody's guess, right? You could flip a coin and who knows. Last year, this fund probably did better. No, actually, it still didn't do better because the S&P rallied back last year. So we would have to go back probably to the last crash to find the time where this fund did better than the S&P 500 over a year period. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have it. I try to respond to your comment, but I figured this is probably something a lot of people think about, so I wanted to elaborate more in this podcast. But I said, I personally don't believe that people should hold bonds under the age of 30. So you being 29, I don't think you need them. And unless you're really afraid of losing 50% of your portfolio, which is not likely, but it's a possibility if you're in a 100% equity position, right? So if you're in a 100% S&P 500 and you go back to 2008, 2009, you lose 50% of your portfolio versus if you're, and you didn't mention what asset allocation you have, but let's just say you're 80-20. So you're 80% S&P and 20% in this intermediate treasury bond fund. Well, maybe then you wouldn't lose 50%, you'd lose 40%, right? So you have that protection on the downside. But the thing is, Shanice, is that more than likely over the next 30 years, there's going to be a lot more up than there's going to be down. And that works against you when you're in a bond fund. So for that reason, I personally don't own any bonds. I do have a cash position that I have in a CD with my credit union that's still at a favorable 3.2% interest rate, a lot better than what the rates are now. So I do hold that as a cash position, which is a little bit over $50,000. Outside of that, I don't hold any bonds for the reason that I know over the next 30 years, because I'm a little bit older than you, I'm 32, but I know over the next 30 years, they're not going to perform as well. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a place in a portfolio for bonds. Just because they don't perform well does not mean you shouldn't own them, because the bond market's actually bigger than the equities market. So it's an important part of a well-diversified portfolio. It's an important part of proper asset allocation and proper risk, risk capacity, if you will, right? So a good place to start thinking about bonds is if you're somewhere less than, I would say 15 or 10, let's say even 10, maybe it's 10's aggressive, but if you're 10 to 15 years away from retirement, you should probably start thinking about bonds because one, it's going to spit off some fixed income for you, which is a good thing. And two, it's going to protect from that very rare case, but it's going to protect from that 50% drop. The last thing you'd want at, let's say you're 5 years away from retirement. So you just go the whole way 100% equities and you build up a massive portfolio. Let's say you build up a portfolio of $2 million. And you're 5 years away from retirement and you're thinking you got it, 2 million, the market just keeps going up, everything's great. And then you lose 50% of that. So you go from 2 million to 1 million. And all of a sudden, you only have 5 years left before you retire. And you run the numbers, and $1 million doesn't get you to retirement. You're going to run out of money if you only have $1 million. You needed $2 million, right? That's where I think you run into problems, right? And you should definitely, before you even get to that point, before you expose yourself to that type of risk, you should definitely consider having some type of allocation to bonds. So for me, I think once you're at age 40 and you're 20 years away from retirement, you should at least start thinking about this. Just like I plan to probably think about it at age 40. More than likely, I will implement bonds at age 50. That's been the plan all along. But, things change, right? Like if, let's say I get to $2 million by age 40, I bet you I'm going to put some bonds in my portfolio because I'm not going to want to risk all of the 2 million, right? I'm not going to want to risk losing 2 million. So maybe I might go just to start 80-20, right? Have 400,000 in bonds and have the other 1.6 in the stock market. And then as I get, to 4.5 million, 5 million, and I get older, it'll probably be closer to somewhere around the 70-30. 60-40 maybe depending on interest rates and yields, but 70-30 I think would be a comfort level that I would be okay with. And that historically the 80-20 and the 70-30 have actually done really well in even the 60-40 historically has done well in protecting you from heavier losses than if you're 100% equities, but also not limiting as much your upside. Of course, it does limit. You're always better off 100% equities, right? If you can tolerate it and if you have the time to recover. But there's something to be said about having a little bit of protection at a time when you're a little bit vulnerable, especially so close to retirement. So, Shanice, thank you for the comment. I really hope that helps answer your question. And I hope that maybe you're listening to the podcast so you can hear the answer. But even if you're not, maybe somebody else had a similar question or thought about bonds before, because I've covered bonds, not too much on my channel. I think my viewership is the millennial. I say the millennial. Yeah, my viewership is the millennial, and that's the age group at least. The 25 to 34-year-olds is the majority of the people that watch my stuff. And I don't talk about bonds because I just feel like in our portfolios it's not necessary, outside of the case that you're really risk adverse and you're so afraid of losing money that you want to be in bonds. That, again, by all means, you probably should be then, if that's what you're comfortable with. But for the majority of us who have appetite for risk, you'll probably be better served 100% equities. So that's going to be it for this week's episode. I know it's short and simple. It's not like the usual 30 minutes. I apologize. But, I am running a little bit low on time, so I'm sorry about that, guys. And I don't want to keep dragging you along. But next week, I'll make sure we spend a little more time talking about the topic that we'll be talking about next week, which I don't even know what it is yet. Before I leave you, guys, please, down below, if you're listening on the Apple Podcast side, leave me a rating and a review. The ratings really help me out. So far, I've gotten 17 ratings, most of them 5 stars. Thank you very much for that. And if you're so kind to just drop me a 5-star rating, it helps push out my podcast. Also, if you want to leave a review for the podcast, if you write a review, I will read it live on the air. And the last review we have here is from East Coast Ghost NY. I've already read his review, but if you write a review, I will make sure I leave it. I read it live on the air. Thanks, guys, so much for listening. As always, remember, move obstacles, keep investing.